There were 9 name cards on that table. I know because I placed them myself 2 weeks earlier in my own handwriting and mailed them to my mother-in-law so the calligrapher wouldn't get the spelling wrong. When I walked into that reception hall, there were only 8. My son's name was missing, not misspelled, missing. And by the time dessert came out, my mother-in-law would be holding a folder she'd never seen before, watching 30 years of her own signature stare back at her. But that's not where this starts. I'm Renee. I'm 36. I restore old houses for a living. I go through basements looking for what's been buried under 50 years of paint, and I guess that's exactly what happened at my husband's parents' anniversary dinner. Something buried came up through the floorboards. I married Adrian 4 years ago. His son from his first marriage, Caleb, was 6 then. He's 10 now. Quiet kid. Draws maps of imaginary countries instead of playing outside. Adrian's mother, Priscilla, decided from the first Thanksgiving that Caleb was a visitor in this family, not a citizen of it. She never said it outright. She just never learned which grade he was in. Here's the thing nobody in that family had bothered to notice. 2 years ago, Priscilla's husband, Adrian's father, a man named Walt, sat me down in his workshop alone and told me something he made me swear not to repeat, not even to Adrian. I kept that promise for 2 years. I was about to break it in front of 40 guests. Walt built cabinets his whole life, same as his son does now. 6 months before he died, the business was drowning. A bad contract, a lawsuit, back taxes stacking up faster than the shop could earn them off. Priscilla never knew how close they came to losing the house. Walt made sure of that. Pride, mostly. He didn't want his wife to know he'd let it get that bad. So he came to me instead of his own son. Because I do books for a living, and because, his words, you don't panic, you just fix the number. I refinanced 2 properties under my name, quietly, and moved enough capital to keep the shop's doors open through the worst 18 months of its life. Walt paid every cent back before he died. Every cent except one thing he couldn't repay: the truth. He wanted to tell Priscilla himself. He ran out of time. I kept his secret in a drawer, literally a manila folder in the bottom of my filing cabinet labeled nothing, because labeled things get found. I told myself it wasn't my story to tell. I told myself a lot of things for 2 years. Then came the invitation, Priscilla and Walt's 40th anniversary, except Walt had been gone 8 months, so it became a celebration of the marriage, hosted by Priscilla, at the same hall where they'd had their reception 4 decades ago. Family only, she said, real family. I should have caught that sentence. I didn't, not yet. We drove in with Caleb in the back seat, holding a card he'd made, a little pen and ink drawing of his grandfather's workshop, tools hung exactly where they used to be. He'd been working on it for a week. He wanted it perfect. We walked in, round tables, place cards in gold script, a slideshow looping on a screen at the front. 40 years of photographs. Caleb tugged my sleeve halfway through scanning the tables. I don't see mine, he said. I told him maybe it got mixed in somewhere. I believed that for exactly 90 seconds, which is how long it took me to find our table and count. 9 chairs, 8 names, Adrian, Renee, Priscilla, her sister's husband, Adrian's cousin Marissa and her 2 kids. No Caleb. I want to be clear, this wasn't an accident. There was a 9th chair. There was no 9th name card. Somebody had decided a chair could exist without a name attached. The way you leave room for a coat, not a person. Priscilla found us at the table, arms out for a hug, all warmth for Adrian, a nod for me and for Caleb. Nothing. Not unkind. Worse than unkind. She looked past him like he was part of the wallpaper. Grandma, Caleb said, holding up his drawing, I made this for Grandpa's table. Priscilla glanced at it for exactly as long as politeness required and said, That's sweet, honey. Go find somewhere to sit. The grown-ups are about to start the toasts. Not your table. Somewhere. He looked at the 9 chairs. He looked at the 8 names. He did the math a 10-year-old shouldn't have to do in a room full of people who love his father, and he sat down in the empty 9th chair anyway, quietly, and set his drawing face down on his lap like something to hide. I almost said something right there. I didn't. I made a different decision, the kind I make with other people's finances every day, wait for the number that can't be argued with, because I hadn't planned to bring the folder that night. But 2 days earlier, going through the last of Walt's workshop with Adrian, we'd found a second envelope in his toolbox, one I didn't know existed. It had my name on it. Inside, a note in Walt's handwriting, and something else. Something that changed what I was holding from a private favor into a legal fact. I put both, the folder from my filing cabinet and the envelope from the toolbox, into my bag that morning. I told myself it was for safekeeping. Some part of me knew better. The toasts started. Priscilla stood at the front with a glass of wine and talked about 40 years of marriage, about family being the one thing that doesn't get diluted, doesn't get watered down, stays exactly what it's always been. And her eyes moved just for a second toward our table, toward the 9th chair. Marissa's kids ran up for the group photo. Someone called for just the grandchildren to gather at the front for a picture. Caleb stood up automatically. He'd done this at every family event since he was 6, and Priscilla's sister, without even lowering her voice, said, "I think this one's for the actual grandkids, sweetheart," and steered him back by the shoulder like adjusting a chair. Caleb sat back down. He didn't cry. He picked his drawing up off his lap, looked at it, and put it back down face first on the table, like he didn't want his grandfather's workshop looking at what had just happened to it. That was the second time that night someone put a hand on my son and moved him like furniture. Adrian saw it. He was 3 feet away, and for once, the slow, careful man I married didn't stay slow. He crossed the room before I could stand. "Caleb's my son," he said to his aunt, not loud, but the room heard it anyway. "He goes in the photo or nobody does." Priscilla arrived at the edge of the group already annoyed, already reaching for the sentence she'd clearly used before. "Adrian, don't make this into something. It's a photo of blood relatives. It's tradition." "He is blood," Adrian said. "He is not," Priscilla said, sharper now, loud enough that the slideshow music felt suddenly obscene behind her. "He's a lovely boy, but let's not pretend. Your father and I built this family, this land, this name. I won't stand here and hand it to a boy who isn't even—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Caleb, still sitting, still holding the upside-down drawing, went very still. The specific stillness of a kid who's just heard the sentence he'd been bracing for his whole life without knowing it had a shape. I stood up. I didn't walk to Priscilla. I walked to my bag. Here's what nobody in that room knew. 2 days earlier, in Walt's toolbox, the note I found wasn't just an apology. It was a legal amendment Walt had filed 6 months before he died. Quietly, through his own attorney, without telling Priscilla, because he was tired of watching his wife draw lines around who belonged and who didn't. He'd named a beneficiary on the shop's remaining assets. Not Adrian, not split between grandchildren generally. Caleb, by name. I hadn't told Adrian yet either. I'd been waiting for the right moment, and apparently the right moment was going to be a wedding anniversary turned memorial with 40 guests watching. I walked back with 2 things in my hands. Priscilla saw the folder first and misread it completely. Probably assumed it was some sentimental scrapbook, something soft to smooth over the moment. "Priscilla," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "Before you finish that sentence, there's something you should see. Walt wanted you to see it. He just ran out of time to show you himself." I opened the folder first. Not the toolbox envelope, the other one. 18 months of transfer records, refinance paperwork, my signature on documents that had quietly kept Walt's shop breathing while he let his wife believe nothing was wrong. "Your husband came to me 2 years ago because the shop was going under, and he didn't want you to know how close. I refinanced 2 of my own properties to cover it. He paid it back, every dollar, but he never got the chance to tell you where the money came from. So I'm telling you now, at his table, on his night." Priscilla's face didn't do what I expected. It didn't soften. It went rigid, disbelieving, the specific fury of someone realizing they've been protected from a truth they'll now have to live with publicly. "That's not— Walt would never hide something like that from me." "He did," I said, "for 18 months, because he loved you and he was ashamed, and because he trusted me to fix a number without asking questions. I kept that promise for 2 years. I'm done keeping it tonight. Then I opened the second envelope, the one from the toolbox, the one even I hadn't fully processed yet. This one isn't about money. This is the amendment Walt filed 6 months before he passed. His attorney has the original. This is just a copy. I laid it flat on the table between the untouched wedding cake and the abandoned photo lineup, and I read the line out loud because I wanted every person in that room to hear it in Walt's own legal language, not mine. Remaining shop assets and tools to be held in trust for my grandson, Caleb, until his 18th birthday. By name, grandson, in writing, filed with a court 6 months before he died. The room went the kind of silent that has weight to it. Marissa's mouth actually opened. Priscilla's sister took a step back like the paper might be contagious. Priscilla stared at her dead husband's handwriting like it had reached across 8 months and slapped her. He never, she started and stopped because the paper didn't care what she'd assumed for 40 years. It just said what it said. He called Caleb his grandson, I said quietly, in a legal document, filed with the county, 6 months before he died, alone in his workshop, without telling either of us, because I think he knew this exact night was coming and he wanted the paperwork to say what he never got to say out loud. Adrian picked up the amendment with both hands like it might tear. I watched him read his father's handwriting, and I watched something crack open in his face that had nothing to do with anger. Caleb hadn't moved from his chair. He was still holding his drawing, still face down, like he hadn't caught up yet to what had just happened in the room around him. Adrian walked over, knelt down in front of his son, the way you kneel for something important, and turned the drawing right side up himself. "Your grandfather kept this shop for you," he said, on paper, before he even knew how sick he'd get. He wanted you to have it. Caleb looked at his father, then past him at his grandmother, still standing frozen by the untouched cake with her husband's handwriting in a stranger's hand. "Can I still sit at the kids' table for the photo?" he asked. Not angry, just asking, the way kids ask the actual question underneath everything. Nobody answered fast enough. So Marissa's daughter, 9 years old, walked over on her own, took Caleb's hand, and said, "Come on, you're literally in my dad's family tree. I checked at Thanksgiving." And that was that. The real grandchildren, without a single adult's permission, made room. Priscilla didn't come to the photo. She stood by the cake with the amendment still in her hand, staring at 40 years of her own certainty rearranging itself in real time. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The paper had already said everything I would have wanted to say. We didn't storm out that night. We stayed for the toasts because some of them were true and some of them were about Walt, and Walt deserved that much. But we left before dessert, Caleb between us, his drawing finally right side up in his hands. In the car, he asked the only question that mattered to him. "Was Grandpa mad at Grandma?" "No," I said. "I think he just knew she needed the truth on paper because sometimes people only believe what they can't argue with." Priscilla called 3 weeks later, not to apologize, not yet, maybe not ever fully, but to ask quietly if Caleb might want to come by the shop sometime and see which tools were his. I said I'd ask him. He said yes before I finished the sentence. Some families run on blood. Ours runs on who shows up when nobody's counting, and on the ones who write it down anyway, just in case somebody needs proof later.